Good evening from Jerusalem and from Moscow. The format of the program this evening is that I will ask Rabbi Lazar a series of questions, letting him respond to them. And then toward the end of our discussion, we will open up the chat so people could ask questions that I will also say to Rabbi Lazar. So it is an honor for us this evening to be joined by the Chief Rabbi of Russia, Rabbi Lazar. For me, this is actually a unique opportunity, as I was born in Russia and from my own family who left Leningrad in 1979 for the States. They still cannot, or perhaps do not, believe that the changes that have taken place in what was once the former Soviet Union, or the Soviet Union, are real. You, Rabbi Lazar, have been quoted as saying that many of these changes have to do with the decisions and approach to the Jewish community of the powerful man who heads Russia, President Vladimir Putin. At the same time, questions remain about the role and directions of the Russian president. As we know, Winston Churchill once famously defined Russia as a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. His words in 1939 spoke quite eloquently to the outside sense of Russia as the other, a different land, difficult to understand, that plays by its own rules and often little understood by the Western world. So many people have called or written prior to this interview and asked me to ask you about what I'll call the true pravda, the real story, the real truth about the changes that have taken place and what the current situation in Russia is today.
First of all, it's a great honor to join you all in Yerushalayim, in Israel, and maybe some other parts of the world, but we actually are dreaming at the end of the Seder this year when we said L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, we actually meant it very, very seriously. Let's hope that very soon we could fly back to Jerusalem and visit all of you, and maybe one day come visit Avichai again, Bet Avichai. But talking about Russia, I think we have to take things into a certain perspective. People look at Russia and trying to figure out what is going on today. Mr. Putin, what does he really believe in? What does he say? What does he do? I've been in Russia for over 30 years. I remember the days of President Gorbachev, President Yeltsin, and then a new era started when Mr. Putin came and became president. What changed? I think, first of all, a certain openness to discuss these issues. I'm not talking about the days of communism. Those days, for sure, Jews suffered here in Russia terribly. Anti-Semitism was coming actually from the government. But when things started changing in the days of Gorbachev and Yeltsin, even though there was much freedom and opportunities of people to start doing business and even freedom of religion, but there was never a real recognition of the problems and issues of the Jewish community. Just to take an example, speaking about anti-Semitism then was just impossible. When the Jews were being attacked, synagogues were being bombed, burned, the answer that we used to get from the government officials and from Mr. Yeltsin himself was, let's not talk about it, just ignore it, go ahead. If we're going to bring up this issue, it's going to become a problem. One thing that surely Mr. Putin did, he tackled head on. He really discussed this issue. He came out, visited the community, visited the synagogue, had meetings with us, discussed these problems. And of course, he doesn't expect, and we don't expect that things are going to disappear completely, but at least there's an open discussion. And I believe a sincere desire to bring a change. Now, there are a lot of conflicting opinions about Mr. Putin. I think on one thing, everybody agrees. He's surely not an anti-Semite. He's surely not afraid to show that the Jewish community has an important part in Russia's development, and not only historically, but actually in the future. At his first visit, when he came to the synagogue, he said clearly that he fully understands all the Jews that left Russia and the Soviet Union because they didn't have a choice. They didn't give them any opportunity to live a normal Jewish life in this country. He tried to bring a change to that. The reasons, I'm sure a lot of people will have different of opinions. Why is he interested in that? Why is he doing that? What is he showing such an approach to the Jewish community? But the fact is a fact. Anti-Semitism is surely down in Russia. People here feel very safe, and the community is thriving.
Would you say that the security of the Jewish community is contingent on his staying in power? If there's a change of guard, may there be would the Jewish community be put into threat? Is it really very much dependent on him?
I think that Russia has changed, and just walking in the streets, you feel comfortable and secure when we were able to walk in the streets. These days, that is also impossible practically. And that is, I think there's a general change of attitude in the people here. Again, anti-Semitism in Russia was coming down from the government. There was a lot of propaganda, a lot of myth, a lot of misunderstandings, and anything that went wrong, the Jews were blamed. Today, this is not the case. Today, clearly people see the investment and what the Jewish community has done for Russia, the way we are part of society. Just to give an example, in the last 2 months, what the Jewish community has done for the well-being of the Russian people, it's not only humanitarian help, it's Jewish doctors, it's showing how Israel is interested in helping, bringing in masks and all of that stuff that the Jewish community has done. I think that has shown what the Jewish community is all about. A lot of different projects. Just another example, the Jewish Museum today has close to 1 million visitors a year, and it's mainly not Jewish, has really taught people what we are all about. So again, you never know who could come to power. If it's going to be another communist or another person that is going to bring Russia back to crazy ideas, I'm sure that the Jews are going to be again in danger, because Russia is a country. I think this, when you mentioned before about, you have to understand the spirit and the soul of Russia. Russia is a country that very much looks up to the leader and does what they tell them. If they tell them right now, we have to attack the Jews, that's what they're going to do. Right now, we have to be nice to the Jews, that's what they're going to do.
There's little doubt that President Putin is a very smart and powerful politician. You have accompanied him on many visits, visits to Israel recently for the opening of the monument in Jerusalem and Gan Sacher in memory of the people that died in the blockade of Leningrad. He also seems to be purposely playing a balanced game between the Arab countries, his role in relationship with Syria, Saudi Arabia, and others, and at the same time with the state of Israel. What is your view of Mr. Putin's relationship with Israel? And how reliable do you think his support for Israel is?
So you can imagine that in my discussions with him, the issue of Israel, Syria, Iran came up very, very often. We had long discussions about it. I'm not going to repeat everything here. Maybe one day when we'll
Nobody's
be
listening, but no problem. You could.
One day I'll share with you some of the things that he said. Now, let's seriously. I'll tell you, one of my first meetings, and we started discussing Israel, and he told me, I wanted to share with you my experience. And he told me that when he was deputy mayor in St. Petersburg, at that time Leningrad, he was involved in getting permission for the first Jewish school to open up. Quite a famous story. At that time, there was a minister of education who was Jewish, and he didn't want to give permission because he said, if I'm going to give permission, they're going to say that it's because I'm a Jew, that's why I gave permission. So Putin himself signed the papers to allow the first Jewish school to open up. After that, he was invited to Israel. And he took a trip to Israel, and he came back to Russia, and he said, I have to bring my family to see this miracle. These are his words. What the Jewish people have done in 50 years, taking a desert and turning it into what it became, this is something that every person has to see. He took his wife and daughters, came to Israel. In his own words, he said, I traveled from the north to the south, and I showed them how they turned a country that was really, destroyed, and look what they did in 50 years. He has visited Israel since then very often. Every time I see there's something else that impresses him, makes a change in his, for the better, towards our people. Whether it was the monument in Herzliya, whether it was Yad Vashem, whether it was the Kotel, whether it was now this latest event when they built this memory. I think that he sees, first of all, he sees over 1 million Russian-speaking people in Israel and he understands there's a huge potential. He sees a country which is very similar to Russia. I can't say in the geography, it's a little warmer than Russia and a little smaller, but I think that just the way the politics and cultural life and all these things are part of Israel, he sees that very rarely in other places. The welcome that he has gotten in Israel, every trip has been, he himself told me, when my motorcade drives through the cities, I see people waving, I see the excitement of people. I feel that there's something special the way they look at Russia. And I'm sure there's many, many different factors involved. When he goes to a place like you mentioned, Syria, Iran, there's really no connection. But he always says, listen, we have to be careful because we don't believe in the politics that say America plays with Iran. We don't believe that sanctions are going to help. I think it's just going to bring even more extremist feelings, more hatred, and we're not going to solve anything by playing such a game. That's his opinion. If I agree with it or not, that's for a different time. And we discuss this very, very often. But he believes that he has the possibility, and because of his position, he has to keep a balance. And he tries to keep the balance. At the same time, he has said very, very often that he's not going to do anything to harm the security of the Jewish people and of Israelis. And especially when he talks about children being attacked, terrorist attacks in Israel, that's when he really gets very, very, I would say even emotional. And one of the latest meetings that we had, he told me, I'll quote him, he said, tell me, isn't it a miracle that the Russian army, Russian soldiers, the elite soldiers, are watching the borders between Syria and the Golan? He says, we are there making sure that Israel should be safe. Tell me, can you believe 50 years ago, a Russian leader telling the rabbi that that's what we are busy doing, watching the security of Israel? So again, in the historic context, if you talk about 50 years, I think a lot has changed. Is there much more that we can do? I'm positive we can. But, and I must say this, he has had a great relationship with many Israeli leaders, starting from Arik Sharon and until Bibi Netanyahu. He really feels that there's an open discussion, a willingness to do things in cooperation. A lot of times there are differences of opinions when it comes to Syria and how much Israel should be involved in Syria. But thank God, every time they manage to take care of these issues.
Interesting. One of the ways that a country is judged is by the way it takes care of its elderly and its needy. Its social welfare system, its ability to take care of those who are poor and in need. On the one hand, and despite the failing oil prices, there are reports of Russia having a $550 billion rainy day fund that was accumulated from the sale of oil when prices were still high. According to reports, Russia seems to financially be able to weather the current storm. On the other hand, there are horrible reports coming out of Russia about the current situation of the coronavirus. In addition to the growing number of sick people, there are reports, particularly outside of big cities like Moscow, that many are losing their jobs, difficulty for small businesses, extreme loneliness, lack of support, doctors committing suicide, some on the verge of starving. How do you see the current situation? And what is the current situation in Russia today, both with the virus and also with the way that the government is addressing it?
So first of all, I still don't have a government job, so I'm not the spokesperson for the government. But so let me start from the Jewish community. First of all, we are doing as much as we can to help, especially the elderly and the needy. We're sending out food packages to close to 20,000 elderly people. And in 2 days, we're going to be celebrating here the 9th of May. So everybody's getting, all these elderly people are getting special packages for this Shabbat, but this is going to go on for the next few months, helping them really go through this terrible situation and this hard times. It's hard times not only financially, it's hard for them to leave their home. It's, I would even say, dangerous for them to leave their homes. So that's what we're trying to do. We have a hotline people can call if they need help, whether it's medical or financial or
Dangerous because of the virus.
yes.
Uh,
And they're telling all people, whoever is 65 and above, stay home. The medical situation, I'm talking about hospitals and all of that, is for sure not in good shape. And you mentioned the doctors committing suicide. Just in Kaliningrad, 250 doctors went on strike. They're working very, very harsh conditions. But I must say that, again, if you're talking about the government, they're trying whatever they can. Actually, a lot of attention is being given to the elderly. There were talks in Western countries that when they have a choice to save an elderly person or a younger person, they're going to save the younger person. Russia really doesn't work this way. They have a lot of respect for the elderly people. They always look up to them. And I think they're doing their best that they can. But for sure, they don't have the situation under control. Hospitals are overpacked. And in Russia, people are always very, very scared. As soon as they get a call, they run to the hospital. So you could imagine what's going on today. I'm sure you've seen hours and hours of ambulances waiting to get into hospitals. So again, the Jewish community to do whatever we can. We have voluntary people going out, helping out, whatever we can. Uh, is the situation under control? I don't think. They're saying that this coming week is going to be the hardest week. I spoke to many doctors. As I mentioned before, many of them are Jewish. Really, I would say, Sirut Nefesh. They're up there in the, I would say in the front and can to help these people, but they're telling us all, stay home, don't go out. And sadly, as much as there are all these restrictions, Russia, they're not getting the situation under control. People are out in the streets. Social distancing is not happening. A lot of people say, oh, look what's going on in Israel. We can do the same here. Sadly, I think in the last 2 months, 1 minute period, amazing. Russia is looking at it. Every day in the news, we hear it's about Israel and about new medicine being found and how they're treating the people. A few cases are coming up. So I think, again, to talk about Russia and Israel, I think Russia to Israel for achieving what has managed to achieve, whether it's in technology, medicine, and many more fields. Huge country. You're talking about a country with 140 million, 11 time zones. So it's a lot of efforts are going in today to try to control the population and help those that are becoming sick.
Yeah, you mentioned that next week is going to be, or the doctors are predicting that next week is going to be the hardest. It's because they're expecting the peak to take place.
That's what they say. They say that the peak hasn't reached Russia yet. The worst is yet to come. And they're trying to keep people at home. And the biggest problem, just to show how it works, like 2 weeks ago, President Putin announced that people are going to be off work. Every workers go home, paid vacation, they should go home and not go out to work. People heard the word vacation and paid vacation, they all went out to party. They were, they were in the dachas and the river and lakes and everything. So it's a very difficult situation. When you're talking about Israel, I think it's a small country. You could have some control in it. Here in Russia, it's so big and so vast, and the numbers are so huge that to handle and control the situation today is going to be very, very hard. But that's what they're warning us, and they're telling us, stay home. Again, talking about the Jewish community, I think we have been very, very lucky because from day one, we have told people that if you look at what the Torah teaches us, there's nothing more important than the health and the security of and the well-being of a person. And a minyan is important, but there's much more important is to watch your health and your family's health. So everybody has been at home, no schools, no kindergartens, nothing is open. And I'm not planning to open up very soon. I believe the earliest we're going to open up anything is probably going to be in September.
Wow. Incredible. You keep on mentioning the Jewish community, and that's one of the things that I'd like to ask you about. From what at least we read here, the rate of intermarriage in Russia is 70 to 80%, which means that 7 to 8, if not more, Jews are marrying out seven or eight out of 10 Jews are marrying out. Coupled with the political problems, the economic hardships, et cetera, where do you see the future of the Jewish community in Russia? How do you see it being stable, sustainable, with the numbers of intermarriage rates being so high?
I understand probably where these numbers are coming from. I'm not sure that they're so precise. I don't think the numbers today is 70, 80%. I think it's a little exaggerated. I would say that if in the past it was probably 90%, today we're probably up to 60%. That's my personal opinion. I see how many weddings are taking place and how many people are marrying actually in the Jewish community. So I think that we are in a much better place than we were 20 years ago, 30 years ago. There's much more interest to be involved in the Jewish community. People want to learn, people want to understand, people want to try. So I believe it's a process. We cannot look at the half of the cup and say, oh, it's empty. Of course, there's much, much more to be done, but I think we are moving in the right directions. If you look at the young people today, not because they're religious, not because they're extremely involved in the Jewish community, they just understand that it's better to marry somebody Jewish. And some of them will tell you just because, I'll feel safer and I'll be able to pass on the culture to my children and I'm going to do something for the Jewish people. But I do believe that a big, big change has happened in Russia. If again, I'm sure there are countries which are better off. And I'm sure there are countries which there's much more Jewish tradition and feelings in the air than Russia. But think of where we were 20 years ago, not even talking about 30 years ago. Where we are today is amazing. It's just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of young people that are making a complete change in their life and they're bringing back their parents. I'll just mention some ideas. Look at what's going on today on people that want to keep Shabbat. People that want to, maybe they won't keep Shabbat the way I would like them to keep it, but they want to have a Shabbat table at home. They want to have have Jewish songs in their home. They want to make Kiddush. They want to have the atmosphere of Shabbat. The Jewish religion has become something very positive. And again, not because it's religion, it's because they feel that it's something that's going to add some quality to their life, some excitement to their life, some meaning to their life. And I think Russians in general, that's what they're looking for. They're much more culture oriented, looking for some spirituality than in many other places in the world. And that's why I'm very optimistic that this change is going to continue and going to spread out even more and more and more. So if in the past, people said the synagogues are going to be empty, there's no point in building new synagogues. What's the point of keeping these communities alive? Today, everybody agrees and understands that there is a future here in Russia. Of course, you mentioned the people intermarrying. I think this is our job to find ways to bring these boys and girls together, meet, whether it's at events and now today on the internet, having many different kind of ways for these boys and girls to get to know each other. As I mentioned before, you're talking about a huge country, 200 communities. A lot of these kids are living in small, small communities where they can't find somebody Jewish. So what is it? We're going to give up on them. We have to help them find somebody that is going to, love them.
In today's global village, I know that you travel often. I don't know exactly at the moment if you're traveling often, but you travel often and you see a lot of different Jewish communities. What would you say sets the Jewish community, or if you're speaking about the young people in Russia, is there anything unique? What sets them aside, or what differentiates them from Jewish communities in other parts of the world?
I'll tell you, let's, a Russian person in general, before we're talking about the Jewish people, they look, and I'm sure you've seen them in Israel, they look very tough, very harsh, but deep inside, they have a certain softness and certain I would say, sincerity that you don't see too often. You have to cut through, like we say, there's a matryoshka, these Russian dolls, and you open it up and you see somebody else, and then you open it up, like you said before, inside a riddle and the Enigma. This is what the Russian people really are. As I said before, I've been here 30 years. I'm still trying to figure them out. But when you touch the core, you see an amazing, amazing kind of people. They are very warm, very sincere. If they become close to each other, they're ready to do whatever they can for each other. People are ready to risk their life to help somebody else. At Victory Day, somebody just told me, of course, Russia would win, because the Russians, they're going to go till the end. They're not stopping in the middle. And they say, Adam hu medini, a person, wherever he lives, that's what he becomes, more or less. The Jewish people here are very, very sincere. When they embrace their Judaism, it's something that they don't let go. They become very involved, very active. And that's what we've seen here in the community. It's a very warm community. People help each other, care for each other, and share a lot of different things. Just to give you a small idea, again, we're talking about in today's what's going on here in the community. We have so many things going on the internet, Zoom, and all of that. Whenever there's a birthday of any member of the community, the whole community comes together on Zoom. And you could have 200 people, and each one has to pick up a small glass of vodka and give him his wishes. And it's amazing to see how much warmth is between these people. So the community has become really their family. And it's not only their family because they have no choice, they really become very, very close as a family. And I think this is the power of the Jewish community here. If you ask me, it's much, much more community oriented than in a lot of places. Maybe also because Russian people don't have much of a choice. People say the community is not their second home, this is their first home. They more or less have nothing at home, and they have so much in the community, and they feel this is where they belong. This is where they get warmth, excitement, and friendship, and all of that. And this is really, I would say, the uniqueness. It's a very warm community. When you walk into the synagogue, you think that these people have known each other for decades, and they're probably related like brothers, cousins. And the truth is, they just met half a year ago, when the first time that they came into the community.
Um, you mentioned the million Jews that live in the Russian Jews that live here in Israel. What is the relationship between the communities? If I could dig a little deeper, what do you do as the chief rabbi in terms of encouraging people to make Aliyah, not make Aliyah? You speak about the future and the warmth in the community there in Russia, but what about the future and how you approach it in terms of the message that you send to the young people that come into the community?
So let me uh, answer first the beginning of the question. What is the relationship? The relationship is quite strong because you could imagine most people here have relatives in Israel. And whenever something happens in Israel, it's, the main discussion here in the community. Number two, a lot of people have an Israeli passport. They say, who knows what's going to happen tomorrow? Better to be safe than sorry. So they all came to Israel, got a passport, and they back to. And there's a strong, strong feeling from Israel. This is going back in the 50s, 60s. I'm sure you remember and read the stories about the Six-Day War and all of that, how much the Jewish people here were so connected to what's going on in Israel. I remember once there was a rabbi that visited here in Russia, and there was a seminary of rabbis taking place here, and he spoke in front of them, and somebody asked him, tell me, what is your opinion? How much should we really be connected to Israel, Zionism, and all of that? And he gave an answer which made a strong impression on me. He said, if a Russian Jew doesn't have an Israeli flag hanging somewhere in his home, there's something wrong in his Jewishness. It's nothing to do with Israel or with the ideas. He says, this is what Jewish people in Russia always knew, that Israel is their homeland. Israel is a special place, is the promised land, the holy land. So Israel and Russia are extremely interconnected. I grew up in Italy. I must say, even though we had these Keren Kayemet, small tzedakah pushkas in every home, but I can't say that Israel was an issue in most of the Jewish families. it was a country when we had when there was a 6-day war, the Yom Kippur War. People all of a sudden woke up. But to say that Israel was a topic that was being discussed every Shabbat, every day, that wasn't the case. Here in Russia, that is the case. People feel very, very, very close to what's going on in Israel. They care, and I'm sure you heard of many different projects that Russian Jews have invested in Israel because they believe very much in that. Whether it's Israeli products, whether it's an Israeli singer coming to Russia, or it's going to be anything that has to do with Israel, whether it's salt from the Dead Sea or whatever it is. If the word Israel is on it, it's going to be something exciting. And I just remembered another interesting point. As you know, the Rebbe's father was buried here in the former Soviet Union in Almaty, Kazakhstan. And they once asked the Rebbe, should they put a Magen David on his grave? And the Rebbe said, in Russia, a Magen David is a sign of something Jewish. You must have a Magen David on the grave. I don't think that if you go around cemeteries around the world, you see as many Magen David that you'll see here in Russia. And it's not because it's a symbol connected to like a menorah. It's because they see this is Jewish, this is Israel. So Israel and the Jewish people and the Russian Jewish people are really fully interconnected. Now, going back to the main question is, what do we tell people about Aliyah? Do we encourage it? Do we tell people that that's the only future if you'll move to Israel, or should you stay in Russia? So I must share with you that I have to be very careful, right? I cannot be the one working as the Jewish agency and telling people you have to leave Russia, because then I'm sure the Russian Secret Service is going to realize that I'm an agent of the Mossad, and I don't think it's going to be good for my reputation. So, but nevertheless, I've been asked this question very, very often, especially when I travel to different cities. People approach me, they tell me, is there a future here? Should we stay here? Should we go to Israel? So of course we understand that, going back to your previous question about intermarriage and assimilation, for sure Israel is a much better choice for many people. So what do I tell people? I tell them, listen, depends on two major issues. Number one is, where are you going to feel more Jewish? Number two, where are you more needed? A person lives his life not only to live a life of comfort, but really to give, to bring a change, to help others. So if you can help Israel, an example, if you're a young person and you're ready to serve in the army, or you're ready to invest, you're ready to, then listen, Israel might be a great choice. If you want to give, if you're going to Israel to receive, I'm not sure that's the best choice, because you're going to wake up one day and say, what am I doing here? When I was in Russia, I was so active in the community. I was so much needed. I helped so many people. And here I'm really just living on somebody's, how do you call the basket of, so again, number one is, are you going to be more Jewish in Israel, or going to Israel is going to make you feel that your Jewishness is not so important to you? You're just going to become an Israeli. And number two, do you know what you're planning to do there? Are you going to find a job? Are you going to be helpful to Israel? Are you going to be doing something positive in your life? Or you're just going to sit there and say, wow, why did I leave Russia? Once you have an answer to these two questions, then you can make a decision. So of course, when you're talking about Jews in small communities, I don't know if there's a future for each one of them. But in the larger communities, for a lot of these people, staying in Russia and helping the Jewish community and being involved and bringing other people closer to the Jewish community might be much more important than just, coming to Israel and feeling wasted.
Interesting. When you use the term a bigger community and smaller community, what are you talking about in numbers, just for us to understand? What's a large community? We understand Moscow and St. Petersburg are very large cities, but are those the exceptions? What is a big community? What's the size?
Moscow and St. Petersburg are huge communities. If you compare it to cities around the world, I don't think there are too many cities in the world that have such a large Jewish population. I mean, again, it's just guesses because we don't know exactly, but we believe Moscow has 500,000 Jews, or close to it. St. Petersburg has probably close to 100,000 Jews, and those are really big numbers. And as many synagogues that we're going to open up, they're going to be full. As many Jewish schools, as many programs, they're going to be there's not enough here going on to serve the Jewish people that are interested in being part of something. But you have a lot of other communities, which I would call them mid-size, and they're large enough. And probably there are such 30 cities in Russia, at least 30, 40 cities where there's quite a large community, which means 10,000 people, 8,000 Jewish people, and there's enough going on there. It's a Jewish school, kindergarten, activities for the youth, programs for any age. And there, I think there's for sure a future. But sometimes we visit these communities which have, I don't know, 1,000 people, 500 people. And the question is there any future there for the Jewish people? Are there enough Jews there to sustain a future life? And are they going to find, as we mentioned before, a Jewish boy and a Jewish girl to marry each other? Are they going to have a job there? These communities are becoming smaller, not only within the Jewish community. The question is, there's a future in general for them. And when I visit these cities, and that's where normally I've been asked these questions, it's very hard to tell people, no, you must stay here because they need you. Very often, the best answer for them is actually to leave.
To leave or to make aliyah?
If somebody leaves, it's going to make aliyah.
And what is the tendency today? Is that from those smaller communities, not the ones that have 8 or 10,000 Jews, as you mentioned, is a tendency to make aliyah?
I believe that most people that wanted to make aliyah already did in the past. People that are staying put is because of different reasons, whether it's family reasons, job-related reasons. Sadly, very often it's because they intermarried and half of the family doesn't want to go to Israel. You mentioned about are people leaving to Moscow, to the larger cities? Yes, a lot of that is happening in the young community. Young people, that's what they're doing. There's a strong tendency to move somewhere else where you're going to find a job. Very often it goes as a continuation of their learning in university, and they just stay where they got their diploma and they start working there, they marry. But in these small communities, it's very sad because you come there and they can't even put together a minyan on Shabbat. They can't even, they have no young people that are going to really, take charge. And it's all a remnants of old and not much that we can see in the future of, major changes. So when people ask you, do I have to stay here? It's really a tough question to answer.
Fascinating. You mentioned before that when we spoke about the relationship between Israel and Russia, about the investments that some people in Russia make here in Israel, the interest and the business interest and others. A question that I received before is that some people in the West have commented that with the number of oligarchs that live today in Russia, many of them not in Russia, in Spain, in England, in Israel, is there a need for outside intervention, outside philanthropy for Russian Jewry? Has Russian Jewry, in a sense, graduated to a different level because of the business success that many of the wealthy Russian people who happen to be Jews have? Is there a continued need for it, or have we already grown beyond it?
So again, I want to try to go back in history and say how it all started. There was a time that even though there were maybe some people that had money here in this country, they didn't even know what it meant to give tzedakah. There was no clue what it means. They used to say, I worked hard, I made this money with my sweat and blood. Whoever needs help, let him go and work. What I have to help him? Understanding that we have to build Jewish schools, communities, was really not part of the equation. People didn't even think in that direction. So in the beginning, probably the help came 80% from abroad, maybe 20% locally. And to convince people to help, I think that the best way that it actually hit them was when they saw that there are people around the world that are investing, whether it was foundations, Jewish organizations, and private people. And all of a sudden, the local people woke up and they said, if these people are helping us, there must be something important in doing this. And they saw these buildings going up and schools opening up and a lot of things that were happening. And the oligarchs actually got involved. Sadly, Russia has a tendency to, whenever things calm down, all of a sudden there's another crisis. So the oligarchs, or many of them, as you mentioned, left, and when they leave, it's much harder for them to feel a connection and interest to continue helping. And a lot of them sadly lost their money. Some of them are still helping, but mentioning this because I think that the Jewish people are unique, that we don't help others only if they live next door to us. Of course, that's the first and most important thing, as we say, "Aniya Yircha Kodmim," but it doesn't mean that you're not going to help other Jews. And I think that Russian oligarchs, seeing how philanthropists from other places of the world helped Russian Jewry, triggered in them this desire also to help Israel. So it's been a process of teaching them by example, and the example is really these people and foundations that have helped Russia, and showing them that, yes, we do care for each other. Kol Yisrael ha'arevim zeh lezeh. It doesn't make a difference if I know you, if I meet you, I'm still going to help you. And actually, I must say that this is something that has had a strong impact, not only on the Jewish community, but in the non-Jewish community. Very often we hear how other nationalities, organizations, they say, look at the Jewish community, look how much help they receive from abroad, and look how much today the Jewish people in Russia are helping other places. So I think it's a process. Today, sadly, the situation here economically is much harder than it was in the past. And we, Baruch Hashem, have seen help coming from abroad also in the last, would say, few months. But still, a lot of people here, and some of them are really unique people. Some of them, I think, even know, who, notwithstanding all the hardships that they're going through, they've stepped up and they said, we're not going to stop. We're going to help even more. We understand people are suffering. We're going to help. So what is my take out of all of this? That you never know how much helping somebody is going to affect somebody else to help somebody else. It's really like a chain. And if we take this virus as an example, you know, how quick people catch it, that's how quick a good deed, tzedakah, helping any kind of community anywhere, it doesn't go unnoticed. People take that and they follow up. I don't know if it's the right thing to do on this show, but I'm going to mention it anyways. Many years ago, we felt the need to open up here a Jewish children's home. And people were saying, there's no need, there is a need, there is no need. All of a sudden we realized that actually, sadly, there is a need. There are a lot of families that are completely dysfunctional. The mother is drunk, she has no job, of course, divorced, and in crazy situation, the kids are really suffering. And we had crazy stories that we realized that there is a need. And an organization which you know very well, Karen Keshet, was visiting Russia, and they came and they decided they're going to help build this children's home. And the children's home was built and was a new life for these children. Years later, somebody visited the children's home and he saw the situation. He saw that there's not enough place for all the children, and the space was doubled, means became 3 times as big. If in the past we could fit 45, 50 children, today there's place for 120 children. And became an amazing building with a swimming pool and a sports center and a lunchroom, and it just became a dream for these children. Interesting enough, even though we closed all our mosdot, all our schools and everything, this children home, the children have no choice. We had to keep them here. They're still there, of course, in quarantine, but they are in very safe conditions. So again, you see, Karen Keshet came in, they helped, they built it. Somebody saw this example and decided they're going to double what was invested before. So you never know how far your actions are going to affect somebody else. You're going to help somebody, you never know. Shlach lachmecha. You never know how somebody will take this as an example and do something tomorrow, the next day. It's really endless. It's just like, it spreads like the virus, hopefully even more. If we do good, it's just going to continue spreading.
Well, before we open up for questions, we see in the press and in other things how busy you are, but what, as not only as the chief rabbi, but as Berel Lazar, what gives you the energy to keep going despite all of these difficulties, challenges, these all these limitations sometimes that happen and the ups and downs, especially you mentioned that you've lived there for 30 years. What is it that gives you the kind of energy uh,
I'll share
every
with you a
face all
discussion.
problems?
I'll share with you a discussion that I just had a few hours ago with the principal of our seminary for the girls. It's like a Jewish university for girls. Of course, they're all home. We had to send them home, and they're all over former Soviet Union. Each one in her own city, stuck at home, but they're getting classes throughout the whole day, from morning to night, regular programs, everything online, and they're learning as if they would be in the seminary. And he shared with me that there's a big problem because these girls, part of the excitement was being together. You could imagine 120 girls all together with a dormitory, you know, evening events and all of that. And now they're stuck at home. So it's very, very hard for them. And he feels that even though they're coming to classes and listening and everything, and they're going to hopefully get the diploma at the end of the year for those there, and each one, whatever. So he says it's becoming harder and harder. So he asked me, what do you suggest? And I told him, if you ask me, there's one thing that could give them this excitement back. It's if they're going to give others. I said, challenge them that they should start teaching others. They're in their own community. Let them find people, make a Zoom group, and give a class. It doesn't have to be a 3-hour class. It could be a 20-minute class. It could be a Parshat HaShavua. It could be an anything. But each one of them should become a teacher. I think that what really gives us the biggest energy and the biggest excitement is if we're able to give others. There's nothing like giving others. So some people get the excitement by donating money. Other people is by sharing ideas. Other people is by teaching. But the point is that these girls are just, they don't even realize that when they were together, they were giving to each other, whether it was warmth, care, advice. Now they're all stuck in their own home. They're not giving. And when a person doesn't give, he really just all of a sudden becomes less and less and less, and it dies out. You have to have this excitement when you see giving and other people receiving, and by giving you get so much more in your life and your energy and everything. So you mentioned it. I could tell you that I don't think I ever worked so hard as in the last month and a half. It's nonstop. It's classes and it's meetings on Zoom and it's advice to people and it's I mentioned these birthdays. We have a program here in the community. It's called Drink Tea with Someone. So we invite somebody else to drink tea together with us on Zoom. It's actually very, very, it's very Jewish because we didn't have to pay for the tea and the cookies that the other guy is drinking. So we're sitting at home drinking tea and there's somebody else on Zoom and he's also drinking tea. And it shows when you're sharing with each other, when you're giving to each other, you gain so much. And I believe that this is what's most important today for people. Of course, it's, happiness, excitement. Don't forget to exercise. Don't forget to do everything, but give to somebody else. Share new idea. Think, how can I help someone? How can I call someone and give him this moral support? How can I give somebody a feeling that I'm thinking of him? You're going to get off the phone. You're going to feel like $1 million. So that's what I'm telling everybody. Just use this unique opportunity you're at home to give. Give your family, give your children, give others. By giving, you're going to get so much energy back to do much more.
Now that that you come from a large family and you have parents that live in Milan and you have sisters that live in I guess Milan also, but also in New York and in other places in the world. Do you stay connected the same way in your family? Is there Zoom meetings for the Lazars? Is there a way to connect?
Actually, I don't. As I mentioned before, that I don't remember being so busy. I don't think our family was ever as connected as we are now. All of a sudden, every event, there's a yard set in the family. The whole family has to come together and hear stories about the grandmother. There's somebody has a marriage anniversary, so you have to get together. Somebody has a Opshernish, you have to get together. Bar mitzvah, you have to get together. It's like we're busy. I just go on them, I wish the mazel tov, and I just run away. I make believe I'm there and I put my picture there. But I'm joking. Actually, I found out about my family so much more than before. And I think that we're busy, as you mentioned before, flying, going to meetings, coming from meetings. And who knows what we were busy with. Today, we realize that there's so much time available to connect with what is dear to us, important to us, and where we have to make a point to do it. We have to find reasons to connect because otherwise we're all going to go crazy. We're all sitting in these boxes and like, or it's going to be a prison or it's an opportunity to reach out to the world. So it's really up to us. In our mindset, we're going to decide if we are free or chas v'shalom if we are locked up. We're not locked up. We are free to reach out to anywhere in the world. And probably this miracle, which is called Zoom, was created especially for these kinds of days. And I hope we won't need it in the future. But I think it taught us an important lesson that he could feel connected to somebody, even though he's not in the same room. You could care for someone, even though he's far away. And maybe actually caring for somebody today is much more meaningful, much more important, and it gives us much more satisfaction than ever before.
Are you planning for the post virus state for the Jewish community? Is it the post Zoom kind of plans and thinking, and or is it still very much, since the peak is coming, unfortunately, and other things that you mentioned before, is it still very much in that state, or is there already plans for the post Zoom Russian Jewish community?
I could tell you one thing. There's a plan for a huge, huge party that's going to take place in the community once we open up. People are saying we're going to bring all the vodka, all the whiskey that we have, everything. We're just going to come party and we're not going to go away. So there's a big party plan. That's number one. But I think more important is actually we have to learn from this. We have to understand that we have to become better people, stronger people. I don't mean physically, I mean spiritually. We have to understand that we sadly, we wasted a lot of time when everything was available. And now it's time to refocus and think what is really important in our life. I think the community will look different. I believe that we found a lot of people that did not really understand why we needed a community, and today they do understand. So we're going to have a lot of new people coming into the community. We'll get to know them more. But at the same time, I think it's going to look very different. I think people are still going to be edgy and worried for a long time. I think that the trauma, as much as people say that, nothing is happening, I think it's going to be felt, especially by the young children. We don't even realize how much is going through their mind, how much they're really worrying. And I'm not sure that each family is able to give this feeling of assurances to the kids. We're trying to work with the psychologists to help the teachers, in a subtle way, give a message to these children that everything is fine. You don't have to worry. Everyone is safe. But deep down, it's like, I don't want to compare it, but it's like kids that went through the war. I just mentioned my grandmother, who just had a yard site. Her whole life, she kept the Holocaust inside of her, and she never spoke about it. She never spoke about it because it was really a trauma in her life. And you never know how much these children are going to be affected, how much it's going to affect their future. So we have a lot of work ahead, no question about it.
So you're not worried about the work?
Actually, I always say, thank God we have what to do. Otherwise, we would be so bored and we would really go crazy. So,
Rabbi Lazar, thank you. Thank you very much for the interview. Well, Bruria, if you could open it up now for around 10 minutes of questions, that would be great. If you could open up the chat, please.
It's open.
Thank you. Okay. I think people are looking forward to you going back to work because it doesn't seem that there are too many questions here. Some of the questions that I'm getting.
You asked all the tough questions, so there's nothing left to ask.
No, I'm getting private questions here, and they're really repeats of, I don't know how people could do this privately, but repeats. Here we have a question about how does Russia celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut?
So if you ask me about this year or in general, this year, of course, was on Zoom, and there were a lot of programs, and people spoke about Israel, spoke about their connections to Israel. People spoke about their visits to Israel, but everything was on Zoom, of course, this year. There was nothing face to face. But every year, normally, there's an event that the Israeli embassy, the Israeli center organizes. The whole community comes together. It's actually, it could be it's everywhere in the world when there's a, how's it called, Yom Ha'atzmaut in
Israeli.
Independence Day. So Independence Day, whether it's France or Italy, so these embassies have events. Of course, the Israeli one is huge. You can't compare it to any other countries. And of course, they have all the Israeli food, falafel, and all of that. And it's people think falafel and hummus are Israeli. They think everything is Israeli. So anyway, but there's this huge event, Israeli music, and not only the community, and not only government officials, everybody comes. It's hundreds and hundreds of people, a real happening. And normally we also sort of rent out a park or a big area in Moscow where the whole community comes together. Everybody has their stands, events, concerts. There's a lot happening. So as I mentioned before, Israel for Russian Jews is something very, very close, and people have always, always felt a strong connection. And I think because they weren't allowed, because it was something that people didn't have a chance to connect with, that's why today when they have it, it's something so exciting. So people come out in their masses. Any event that has to do with Israel is going to excite them. Because I want to share with you a small experience that we had when we just started. And I mentioned before that people in the beginning of the 90s were afraid to even tell their own neighbor or sometimes even their own children that they're Jewish. We had to find a way to reawaken this spark and get them excited. So what did we do? We plastered the whole city with billboards, and it said matzah from Israel. And there was a Israeli looking boy holding this piece of matzah, and that brought tens of thousands of Jews to come get this matzah from Israel. So matzah is of course always exciting, but if it's from Israel, that's like, wow. So that's how we brought the people to first connect to the Jewish community. And after that, once they're connected, you can tell them that hummus and falafel is actually Israeli food, and even though it's made here in Russia. So
I'm getting both on WhatsApp and also, again, I don't know how people do privately, but there's a question about everywhere about anti-Semitism in Russia. People, they heard your response in terms of the president and in terms of on the government level, but people are also asking on the street level about anti-Semitism. You say that the government is much more positively in their approach and in their dealings with the Jewish community. The president has a very positive relationship from what you've said with Israel. But what about the man in the street? What about the regular kind of worker? What is the situation with anti-Semitism on in the everyday interactions?
Okay, so first of all, sadly, there's still cases of anti-Semitism. We just had, it must have been 3 weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks ago, there's a synagogue in Arkhangelsk, which is the most northern community that we have. It's was actually, they tried to start a fire there, but the synagogue, just the door was damaged, but there are still cases of buildings or things happening, very rarely, but they do happen. To say that the situation here is just paradise, I wouldn't say that. But if you compare it to Europe, I would say even today to the US, we are in a much better position. You could walk in the streets, you don't feel any anti-Semitism. Yes, of course, if you open up the internet, you'll see some young people writing all kinds of crazy things. But the general attitude here towards Jews has for sure changed for the better in a major way. And people feel safe. It's not only the government. As I said before, I think there's a lot that the Jewish community has done to change the attitude and these myths that used to be here around this country. When I first came here, I remember Jews telling me, why do we need to use blood in the matzah? Like, there was so much propaganda against the Jews that everybody believed it.
How did you respond?
This was actually a taxi driver who was asking, why do we need to eat matzah? And I was explaining him why do we need to eat matzah, and he couldn't figure out, why do we need to put the blood of non-Jewish children? I told him, are you like out of your mind? Jews can't even eat an egg if it has a drop of blood, and you think that we're going to put blood inside the matzah? Like, where do you get this from? He says, this is what I always heard from all my friends. I heard that that's what we do. So there was a lot of anti-Semitism being spread in this country. Today, thank God that's not the case. And I think you have a new generation that thinks differently, looks differently. Normally, the reaction of people when they meet you is, are you Jewish? And of course I said, yes. Like, what else do you think I am? And people say, wow. You know, and very often they'll tell you, kol hakavod to the Israeli army, what you people have done, what Israel has done, what the investment of the Jewish people. Today, it's really a different story altogether.
One of the, thank you, one of the leaders here of the JDC that apparently knows you well, whom I know also, Cheryl Fishbein and Phil Shatton, are asking for you to comment on the cooperation between Chabad and the JDC, particularly in rural areas. I imagine this question could be expanded in not only the JDC, but also with other Jewish organizations.
I must say that we have been very, very, very lucky. We have an amazing relationship with every Jewish organization, whether it's, again, as I mentioned before, the Sukhnut, of course, the JDC. The JDC is doing and has done incredible work here in Russia. I mentioned before giving out food packages. This is a program which we just started, and we're actually planning to work together with the JDC to reach out to these people and help them. But just to give an example, we have a social center here with a clinic and, of course, soup kitchen, clubs and everything. And what it's called here in Russia, patronage, which is visiting elderly people in their home and giving them support, cleaning their home and washing them and all of that. All this is done in cooperation with the JDC. So the JDC have been incredible throughout all the years. Rural areas, of course, the same. I must say that if I can give a pitch, I think that it's important that the JDC should remember that even though we know that today the situation in many other places in the world is also very hard, there are difficulties all over, don't forget that Russia is really going through a very hard time, and we need the JDC in every little city, in every Jewish community. So, but the relationship has been great. I must say, with every Jewish community, the Israeli center, with the, you name it, thank God we have worked together. We have realized that only together we can really help the people here and understand the needs and to find a solution to help them.
Lazar, thank you very much. It was, for me at least, it was an interesting hour and some minutes. There are more questions here, but we'll let you go back to the important work. Thank you very, very much, and hatzlacha rabba in all the things that you do.
Thank you. We are very jealous of what's going on in Israel. We heard that you're allowed to walk out in the streets, go into stores, I don't know, have minyanim, go into malls, but please keep safe, and hopefully one day we'll come visit.
One day soon.
Amen.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All the best.
Bye-bye.